Captain Sarah Chen stared at the coffee machine with the same look she gave broken equipment. It was making strange noises again. The UES Persistence was 3 weeks into what should have been a simple mining job, and already half the ship's systems were acting up. "Martinez, did you fix the coffee maker yet?" she called out to her chief engineer. "Working on it, Captain," came the reply from somewhere deep in the ship's belly. "Right after I figure out why the FTL drive is humming show tunes." Dr. Elena Okafor looked up from her tablet, where she was reading about alien plant samples from their last stop. "It's actually humming something classical. Mozart, I think." "Great," Chen muttered. "A cultured FTL drive." The Persistence was not a pretty ship. It looked like someone had stuck engines on a flying warehouse, which was basically what it was. The crew of 12 spent their time pulling rare metals out of asteroids in the outer rim of human space. It was honest work that paid well. But it was not glamorous. Chen walked to the bridge, stepping over cables that the crew never seemed to have time to properly secure. The view outside showed the usual sight. Rocks floating in space, waiting to be turned into valuable materials. Her crew had been doing this dance for years now. "Captain, you might want to look at this," said Navigator Pete Williams. He was pointing at his screen with a confused expression. Chen walked over and saw readings that made no sense. "What am I looking at, Pete?" "Well, according to the sensors, there's nothing wrong. But according to the FTL drive, we're about to jump into a dimension that doesn't exist." "Run that by me again?" "The drive thinks it found a shortcut. A really big shortcut. Like, impossibly big." Chen sipped her terrible coffee and considered this. The Persistence had an experimental FTL system that was supposed to be more efficient than standard drives. So far, it had been more unpredictable than efficient. Last month, it had jumped them 3 days ahead of schedule. The month before, it had jumped them backwards in time by 6 hours, which had led to the very confusing experience of watching themselves arrive at a mining site they had already left. "How big a shortcut are we talking about?" she asked. Williams checked his readings twice. "If these numbers are right, we could cut 6 months off our return trip. And if the numbers are wrong, we could end up scattered across several different realities." Chen considered this. The company would dock their pay if they were late with the shipment. On the other hand, being scattered across different realities would definitely void their insurance. "Martinez," she called on the comm system. "How confident are you in the FTL drive?" "About as confident as I am in the coffee machine, Captain." "It'll probably work, but I make no promises about the results." "Good enough for me. Pete, plot the jump." "Captain, are you sure about this? The readings are really strange." "Pete, we've been flying with this crew for 4 years. When have the readings ever been normal?" Williams had to admit she had a point. He started the jump sequence, while Chen settled into her captain's chair, which was actually a comfortable office chair she had bought herself, because the company issued one, had hurt her back. The jump started normally. The ship's lights dimmed as power flowed to the FTL drive. The familiar vibration ran through the ship's hull. Then, things got interesting. Instead of the usual smooth transition, the ship felt like it was being pulled through something thick and sticky. The lights flickered in patterns that reminded Chen of Christmas decorations. The humming from the FTL drive got louder and started harmonizing with itself. "This is new," said Williams, watching his instruments spin like compass needles near a magnet. "How long until we know if we're dead?" asked Chen. "Give it 30 seconds. 30 seconds passed. Then 60. The ship was still vibrating, and the lights were still flickering. Dr. Okafor appeared on the bridge, looking curious rather than concerned. "Are we supposed to be able to see the jump tunnel?" she asked, pointing out the main viewing window. Chen looked and saw swirling colors that definitely should not have been visible during an FTL jump. "No, we are not supposed to see that. It's actually quite beautiful," said Okafor. "Like the aurora, but with more purple." Then, as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The ship was floating in normal space again. surrounded by stars that were in completely the wrong positions. "Well," said Williams, checking his instruments, "the good news is, we're all still in the same reality. And the bad news? I have no idea where we are." Chen looked out at the strange stars and noticed something else. There were lights moving among them. Lots of lights. And they were moving in very organized patterns. "Pete, are those ships?" Williams magnified the view. "Yes, Captain. Lots of ships. Really big ships." "How big?" "Some of them are bigger than the space stations back home." Dr. Okafor pressed her face against the window like a kid at an aquarium. "Oh, this is exciting. First contact." Chen watched the massive alien vessels moving in formation and felt mostly annoyed that their schedule was about to get even more complicated. "Martinez, how's our comm system?" "Working fine, Captain." "Good. Pete, any of those ships trying to talk to us?" "Actually, yes. We're getting some kind of signal. It's very loud." "Put it through." The bridge speakers crackled to life with what sounded like an angry alien with a head cold trying to speak through a megaphone. "Unknown vessel, you will identify yourself immediately and prepare for inspection by the glorious forces of the hegemony." Chen looked at her crew. Her crew looked back at her. "Hegemony?" she said finally. "Sounds like a government," said Williams. "Probably bureaucratic," added Okafor helpfully. Chen sighed and reached for the comm button. In her experience, the best way to deal with bureaucrats was to be polite and persistent until they got tired and left you alone. "This is UES Persistence, requesting traffic control guidance for safe passage. We appear to be off course and would appreciate navigation assistance." There was a long pause. Then the alien voice came back, sounding confused. "You will." "What?" "That's correct. We're a mining vessel, and we seem to have taken a wrong turn. If you could point us toward the nearest refueling station, we'll be out of your way as soon as possible." Another pause, even longer this time. "Prepare to be boarded," the voice said finally. But it sounded less angry and more puzzled. Chen turned to her crew. "Well, this should be interesting." Admiral Zorax had conducted first contact ceremonies with 43 different species during his long career. He knew the routine by heart. The aliens would either cower in fear or try to impress the mighty hegemony with their primitive weapons. Then he would deliver his speech about hegemony dominance, accept their surrender, and add another species to their empire. This was not going according to plan. The human ship had docked at Station Gamma 7 with the casual efficiency of a mail delivery. When his troops had boarded their vessel expecting resistance or at least nervous submission, the humans had simply continued working. One of them, a woman with grease-stained coveralls, had actually asked if the soldiers wanted coffee. Now Admiral Zorax stood in the station's main conference room, watching the human captain check something on a small device while he prepared for his grand speech. She looked about as interested as someone waiting for a bus. "Captain Sarah Chen of the vessel Persistence," he began, his voice echoing dramatically in the large chamber. "You stand before the representatives of the 1,000-year hegemony, rulers of 600 star systems and masters of 10 billion souls." Captain Chen looked up from her device. "That sounds like a lot of paperwork," she said. Zorax paused. In all his years of conducting these ceremonies, no one had ever mentioned paperwork. The hegemony has brought peace and order to the galaxy through superior strength and wisdom. Lesser species find protection and purpose under our guidance. Chen said, making a note on her device. "Do you guys have maps of this sector? Our navigation system seems to have hiccuped." "Maps?" Zorax felt his carefully prepared speech derailing. "You dare speak of maps when facing the might of the hegemony?" "Well, yes. We're kind of lost. This isn't showing up on any of our charts." She gestured vaguely at the space around them. Zorax tried to get back on track. He drew himself up to his full 7-foot height, his ceremonial armor gleaming under the lights. The hegemony extends its protection to all species willing to acknowledge our supremacy. Those who resist are crushed beneath our iron fist. Captain Chen nodded politely. That's nice. Listen, we really appreciate the welcome and everything, but we're on a tight schedule. Our company docks our pay if we're late with shipments. Do you know which direction Earth is from here? Earth? Zorax had never heard of it. What system is that in? Zorax, the Sol system, about 26,000 light-years from the galactic core in the Orion Arm. Zorax turned to his aide, who was frantically checking star charts on a portable device. The aide shook his head. They had never heard of this Sol system. Meanwhile, the human called Dr. Okafor had started a conversation with Commander Thess, his military advisor. She was asking detailed questions about hegemony biology with the enthusiasm of someone who had found interesting bugs in her garden. So the ridges on your forehead are bone structures, not cartilage? Okafor was saying, taking notes. Fascinating. And the skin color variations are those regional differences, or signs of age? Commander Thess, who had expected to be feared and respected, found himself awkwardly answering questions about his skin condition. Captain Chen was still waiting for directions. Look, Admiral. Admiral Zorax, Supreme Commander of the Outer Rim Fleet, he said, his voice slightly less booming than before. Right, Admiral Zorax, we're really just trying to get home. We've got about 2,000 tons of refined lithium in our cargo hold, and if we don't deliver it on time, our whole crew loses their bonus pay. You speak of commerce while facing the power of the hegemony? Chen looked genuinely puzzled. Why wouldn't I speak of commerce? That's what we do. In another part of the room, Chief Engineer Martinez had somehow ended up in a technical discussion with the station's engineering staff. They were comparing engine designs with the kind of enthusiasm that engineers shared regardless of species. See, your plasma flow regulator is set too high, Martinez was explaining to a confused hegemony engineer. That's why you're getting those power fluctuations. You want to dial it back to about 60% and reroute the excess through the secondary manifold. But that is not how the manual says to do it, the alien engineer protested. Manuals are written by people who don't actually fix the engines, Martinez said with the confidence of someone who had been proving manuals wrong for 20 years. Admiral Zorax watched his carefully orchestrated first contact ceremony falling apart. The humans were treating the mighty hegemony like a slightly inconvenient government office. Captain Chen was now asking about fuel prices and whether they accepted credit transfers. Captain Chen, he said, trying to regain control of the situation. You must understand that your species has entered hegemony space without permission. This is an act of aggression. Chen looked surprised. Aggression? We got lost. That experimental FTL drive dropped us off in the wrong place. We're not trying to invade anyone. We just want to get home. Nevertheless, you must submit to hegemony, authority, and accept our rule. Chen considered this for a moment. Look, Admiral, I'm sure you run a fine operation here, but we've already got a government back home. Adding another one would just complicate our taxes. How about we just pay for fuel and directions instead? Zorax felt something he had never experienced during a first contact ceremony. Complete bewilderment. These humans were not impressed by hegemony power. They were not afraid of hegemony strength. They were treating the greatest empire in the galaxy like a gas station. You refuse to acknowledge hegemony supremacy? He asked, hoping to get some kind of normal response. It's not that we refuse, Chen said carefully. It's just that we're not from around here. So your local politics don't really apply to us. It's like if you were driving through someone else's neighborhood, you follow the traffic laws, but you don't automatically become a resident. Dr. Okafor had now started measuring Commander Thess with a small device, asking if she could take a tissue sample for analysis. The commander, who had conquered 17 star systems, found himself allowing a strange alien to examine his ear canal because she seemed so enthusiastic about it. Engineer Martinez had drawn a crowd of hegemony technical staff who were listening to his suggestions about improving their power systems. He was explaining why their current setup was inefficient, using words like obviously and basic engineering principles. Admiral Zorax realized that in 30 minutes, these humans had done something no enemy of the hegemony had ever managed. They had made his people question whether the hegemony was actually as impressive as they thought. "Captain Chen," he said slowly, "perhaps we should continue this discussion over a meal. The hegemony is known for its hospitality." Chen checked her device again. "That's very kind, but we really should get moving. How long do you think it would take to fuel up our ship?" "Several hours," Zorax said, seeing an opportunity. "Plenty of time for cultural exchange." "Well, if we're going to be here that long anyway," Chen said with a shrug. "Dr. Okafor will love it. She's been complaining about the lack of interesting alien life forms to study." Zorax looked at Dr. Okafor, who was now asking Commander Thess to demonstrate his species' mating call. He wondered what exactly he had gotten himself into. "This should be educational," he said quietly. Word spread through hegemony space faster than a computer virus. A species had been discovered that treated the mighty hegemony like a minor inconvenience. Within days, reports were flooding into the high command from across the empire. The humans had set up what they called a supply run through 3 different hegemony systems. Captain Chen had filed proper paperwork for trading permits, submitted cargo manifests, and even paid the required fees. She had turned galactic conquest into a routine business transaction. On Station Gamma 7, Chief Engineer Martinez had started a weekly poker game in the station's recreational area. It had begun with just the human crew and a few curious hegemony engineers. Now it included representatives from 6 different species, including some who were supposed to be enemies of each other. "The thing about quantum regulators," Martinez was explaining to a hegemony maintenance chief while dealing cards, "is that they work better when you don't overthink them. Sometimes you just have to trust the machine to know what it's doing." "But the technical specifications clearly state," began the maintenance chief. "Technical specifications are what happen when engineers try to explain intuition to bureaucrats," said Martinez. 5-card draw, jacks or better, to open." The maintenance chief looked at his cards and realized he was learning more about engine repair in one evening than he had in his last 3 training courses. Meanwhile, Dr. Okafor had become the most popular person on the station. She treated every alien species she met like fascinating research subjects, asking endless questions with genuine curiosity and no fear. Her enthusiasm was infectious. "So your people evolved from pack hunters?" She was asking a hegemony security officer. That explains the hierarchical social structure and the emphasis on dominance displays. "But tell me, how do you handle conflict resolution within family groups?" The security officer found himself explaining family dynamics to a being from another galaxy, and somehow it felt more natural than following military protocols. Captain Chen had spent the week systematically working through the station's bureaucracy. She had filed complaints about inefficient docking procedures, suggested improvements to the traffic control system, and somehow ended up in a meeting with the station administrator about updating their computer network. "The problem with your current system," she was explaining to Administrator Kelks, "is that everything has to go through 17 different approval levels. In the time it takes you to process a simple fuel request, our company could mine an entire asteroid." Administrator Kelks found himself taking notes. The human's suggestions actually made sense, but implementing them would require changing procedures that had been in place for centuries. "But these protocols ensure proper authority and respect for the chain of command," he protested weakly. "Do they, though?" Chen asked. "Because from what I've seen, mostly they just slow everything down and frustrate people. Back home, we tried that kind of system once. Productivity dropped by 60% before we scrapped it. On other stations throughout hegemony space, similar scenes were playing out. Human traders were treating galactic politics like market conditions, something to be understood and worked around, but not necessarily respected. They paid their fees, followed local traffic laws, and otherwise ignored the complex hierarchy that held the empire together. The effect on other species was remarkable. The Zentorians, who had been conquered by the hegemony 50 years ago, started asking why they needed special permits to trade with their neighboring systems. The Mollusk Collective began questioning why they had to pay tribute to a species that seemed no more advanced than themselves. If the humans can just file paperwork and go wherever they want, asked Collective Representative Thlock at a diplomatic meeting, why do we need to ask permission? The hegemony representative had no good answer. The system worked because everyone believed it worked. When someone stopped believing, the whole thing started to look arbitrary. Admiral Zorax found himself in an emergency meeting with the High Command. The other admirals were demanding action against the humans, but no one could agree on what that action should be. "They're undermining everything we've built," said Admiral Kresh, pounding the conference table with one of his 4 fists. "Lesser species are starting to question our authority." "They're not actually doing anything wrong," pointed out Admiral Venn. "They follow our laws, pay our fees, and treat everyone politely. What exactly are we supposed to punish them for?" "For not being impressed with us," roared Kresh. Supreme Admiral Drax, leader of the hegemony fleet, had been quiet throughout the meeting. Finally, he spoke. "The humans present us with a unique problem. They are not our enemies. Enemies at least acknowledge our power by trying to defeat it. They are not our subjects. Subjects know their place in the hierarchy. They are customers." The room fell silent. Being treated like shopkeepers by a species they had never heard of was somehow more insulting than outright rebellion. "What do you recommend, Supreme Admiral?" asked Zorax. "We need to demonstrate our superiority in a way they cannot ignore. Challenge their ship to combat. Show them what happens when they fail to show proper respect." Back on Station Gamma 7, Captain Chen received the formal challenge while reviewing fuel invoices. She read it twice, then called her crew together in the ship's common area. "So apparently Admiral Zorax wants to fight us," she announced. "Something about demonstrating hegemony, superiority, and teaching us respect." Martinez looked up from the engine manual he was reading. "Are we talking about actual fighting, or more of a training exercise thing?" "According to this, actual fighting. Ship-to-ship combat." Dr. Okafor seemed excited. "Oh, that could be interesting. I wonder what their combat tactics reveal about their evolutionary development." Navigator Williams was more practical. "Captain, we're a mining ship. We don't have weapons." "We've got mining lasers and asteroid deflectors," said Chen. "Same principle, really." "Are we seriously considering fighting the local space navy?" asked Williams. Chen shrugged. "If it gets us home faster, sure. Besides, how hard can it be? We deal with exploding asteroids and solar storms every day. A few alien spaceships shouldn't be much different." She sent a reply accepting the challenge and asking about scheduling. She also requested that the combat take place in an area that wouldn't interfere with commercial shipping lanes. When Admiral Zorax received her response, he stared at it for several minutes. The humans had agreed to fight the hegemony fleet, with the same casual attitude they brought to everything else. They had even suggested convenient times and locations. "They think this is just another item on their schedule," he said to his aide. His aide, who had been listening to the poker game conversations for a week, said quietly, "Sir, what if they're right?" Admiral Zorax looked at his aide with the expression of someone who had just realized that everything he thought he knew might be wrong. The challenge match was scheduled for 1,400 hours on Tuesday, in an empty system about 6 light-years from the nearest trade route. Admiral Zorax had assembled 3 heavy cruisers to face the single human mining ship, which should have been enough to make his point without completely destroying the strange aliens. Captain Chen treated the combat mission like any other work assignment. She held a crew meeting at breakfast to discuss tactics while eating rehydrated eggs and synthetic coffee. "Okay, people, Here's the situation, she said, consulting her notes. The locals want to fight us to prove they're superior. Apparently this is important to them culturally, so we're going to help them out. Martinez chewed his toast thoughtfully. Are we trying to win this fight? Or are we just participating? Good question. I figure we should give them a decent show. But try not to hurt anyone, if possible. This is their neighborhood, and we still need directions home. Dr. Okafor was reading about hegemony military history on her tablet. Their combat philosophy seems to be based on overwhelming force and intimidation displays. Very traditional warrior culture. They probably expect us to either surrender immediately or fight with desperate fury. What are we going to do instead? Asked Williams. Our jobs, said Chen simply. We're going to treat this like a particularly aggressive mining situation and apply standard safety protocols. The crew spent the morning preparing their ship for combat. This mostly involved making sure the mining equipment was functioning properly and reviewing emergency procedures they used when dealing with unstable asteroids. Remember, Chen announced over the ship's communication system, we're not trying to kill anyone today. We're just participating in a local cultural event. Admiral Zorax arrived at the designated coordinates with his small fleet, expecting to find the humans either fleeing in panic or preparing for a desperate last stand. Instead, the Persistence was sitting calmly in space, its crew apparently performing routine maintenance checks. Human vessel. This is Admiral Zorax of the Hegemony Fleet, he broadcast. You have entered sacred space without permission and failed to show proper respect to your betters. Prepare to face the consequences of your arrogance. Captain Chen's voice came back with the tone of someone confirming a delivery time. Admiral Zorax, this is Captain Chen. We're ready when you are. Should we wait for you to get into position, or do you want to start now? Zorax looked at his tactical display. The human ship was not even raising shields or charging weapons. Captain Chen, do you understand that this is a combat situation? Oh yes, we've got it on the schedule. 15 minutes for space battle, then we need to finish refueling and file our departure paperwork. 15 minutes? Zorax had planned for an hour-long demonstration of hegemony superiority. Captain, this is not a scheduled appointment. This is warfare. Same thing, really, Chen replied. You've got a job to do. We've got a job to do. Let's get it done efficiently. Zorax gave the order to attack, hoping that the reality of weapons fire would make the humans take the situation seriously. The first surprise came when the hegemony weapons hit the human ship. The mining vessel's shields absorbed the damage without even flickering. The Persistence was designed to operate in asteroid fields where rocks moved at high speed, and solar radiation could cook an unprotected crew. Compared to that environment, military lasers were just another workplace hazard. Nice light show, Martinez commented from the engine room. Their weapons are actually kind of pretty. The second surprise came when the humans finally returned fire. Captain Chen had not been joking about the 15-minute time limit. The Persistence moved through space like a machine designed for precision work in dangerous conditions, which was exactly what it was. The mining lasers that the humans used to cut apart asteroids sliced through military armor like it was made of paper. The deflector systems they used to push away space debris sent the heavy cruisers spinning like toys. But the most unsettling thing for Admiral Zorax was the humans' attitude. They fought like they were clearing rocks from a shipping lane. There was no anger, no fear, no excitement. They were just doing their job. Target the engines, not the crew compartments, Captain Chen instructed her crew. We want to disable them, not hurt them. Dr. Okafor was providing commentary from the science station. Interesting combat doctrine. They rely heavily on armor and intimidation, but their ships don't seem designed for opponents who fight back effectively. Within 10 minutes, 2 of the hegemony cruisers were disabled and drifting. The third was trying to retreat, but had taken damage to its faster-than-light drive. Admiral Zorax. Captain Chen called over the communication system. Do you need assistance with repairs? We've got some spare parts, and our engineer is pretty good with different types of technology. Admiral Zorax stared at the tactical display showing his defeated fleet, then at the human ship that was offering to help fix the damage it had just caused. In 40 years of military service, no one had ever offered to help him repair his ships after beating him in combat. "Why would you offer assistance?" he asked, genuinely confused. "Because your ships are damaged and you're stuck in empty space," Chen replied as if it was obvious. "That's dangerous. We might not be from around here, but we know about space safety." As the humans began helping to repair the hegemony vessels, word of the battle spread throughout the galaxy. The details became more amazing, with each telling. A single mining ship had defeated 3 hegemony cruisers, then offered to help with repairs. The humans had scheduled the battle like a business meeting and finished ahead of time. On worlds throughout hegemony space, the news had an immediate effect. If a random human cargo ship could defeat the hegemony fleet without even getting excited about it, what did that say about hegemony power? The Zentorians were the first to act. They simply stopped paying tribute. When the hegemony demanded an explanation, they said they were adopting human-style administration and would need to see cost-benefit analysis before continuing payments. The Mollusk Collective filed a formal complaint about hegemony inefficiency and demanded a review of all existing treaties. They cited a recent study by a doctor, Elena Okafor, that classified hegemony military doctrine as adequate but unimaginative. Other species began asking uncomfortable questions. If the mighty hegemony could be defeated by beings who treated galactic conquest like a minor scheduling conflict, maybe the hegemony was not as mighty as advertised. The most devastating blow came 3 days later when Dr. Okafor published her preliminary research on hegemony civilization in the Galactic Science Journal. The paper was titled Observational Study of a Standard Warrior Culture, Behavioral Patterns and Evolutionary Limitations in Hegemony Society. 1. The key finding was in the abstract. The hegemony represents a typical example of aggressive, hierarchical development, showing standard patterns of intimidation-based social organization and below-average innovation capacity. The paper went viral across the Galactic Information Network. The mighty hegemony had been scientifically classified as typical and below average. Academic institutions throughout the galaxy began citing the study. News organizations used it to explain hegemony behavior. Within a week, fairly standard became the most insulting phrase in hegemony space. Admiral Zorax found himself in another emergency meeting with the High Command. This time, nobody was demanding military action. They were all too busy trying to figure out how their 1,000-year empire had been undone by one mining ship and a research paper. "How do we fight an enemy that doesn't see us as an enemy?" asked Admiral Kresh, his voice lacking its usual thunder. "How do we intimidate people who have already classified us as typical?" added Admiral Ven. Supreme Admiral Drax stared out the window at the stars his people had once ruled through fear and respect. Now those same stars were full of species, treating the hegemony like just another government with efficiency problems. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "the question is not how to fight them. Perhaps the question is what we do now, that everyone knows what they know." Outside, the galaxy was learning that the most powerful force in the universe was not fear or strength, but the devastating power of genuine indifference. Captain Chen stood in the cargo bay of the Persistence, watching her crew load the last of their supplies for the journey home. After 6 weeks in what used to be called hegemony space, they had finally figured out how to reverse the dimensional jump that had brought them here. "All systems, check out, Captain," reported Martinez, wiping grease from his hands. "The FTL drive is humming something cheerful, which I'm taking as a good sign." Dr. Okafor was busy packing her research samples and notes. She had enough material for at least 12 academic papers and was already planning her next research proposal. "I'm really going to miss this place," she said. "So many fascinating species, and they're all going through such an interesting period of social development. Through the cargo bay windows, Chen could see Station Gamma, 7 inches the distance. It looked the same as when they had arrived. But she knew things had changed dramatically throughout the former empire. The changes had started small. Other species had begun questioning why they needed special permits to trade with each other. They had started asking for explanations of hegemony policies instead of simply following orders. They had begun treating the mighty empire like any other government that needed to justify its existence. The Zentorians had declared independence 3 weeks ago. They had done it politely, filing proper paperwork, and offering to negotiate trade agreements. When the hegemony threatened military action, the Zentorians had simply asked to see a cost-benefit analysis of the war. The Mollusk Collective had restructured their entire relationship with the hegemony. They now treated it like a service provider, paying only for specific benefits and demanding regular performance reviews. They had even started charging the hegemony consulting fees for advice on government efficiency. 17 other species had adopted what was being called the human model of interstellar relations. Instead of accepting hierarchy based on military strength, they insisted on practical arrangements based on mutual benefit. The most surprising change was happening within hegemony society itself. Admiral Zorax had submitted a detailed report recommending major reforms to military doctrine and government structure. His report cited Dr. Okafor's research extensively and included suggestions from Martinez's poker game discussions. The humans have demonstrated that our current approach is not just ineffective, but unnecessary. Zorax had written, "If we want to remain relevant in galactic affairs, we need to provide actual value, instead of relying on intimidation." Supreme Admiral Drax had surprised everyone by implementing most of Zorax's recommendations. The hegemony military was being restructured from a conquest force into a peacekeeping and disaster relief organization. The government was streamlining its bureaucracy using efficiency principles learned from human trading practices. Captain Chen's final task was to meet with the new Hegemony Leadership Council for what they called an exit interview. She found herself in the same conference room where Admiral Zorax had first tried to impress her, with speeches about galactic dominance. "Captain Chen," said Zorax, who was now Director of External Relations, "we wanted to thank you for your educational visit." Chen sipped her coffee, which was much better now that Martinez had helped the station engineers fix their food systems. "Just glad we could help. You folks seem to be adapting well. We wanted to discuss the possibility of ongoing trade relations," said former Supreme Admiral Drax, who now went by Administrator Drax. "Your people seem to have figured out some very efficient ways of doing business. I'll pass that along to the company," Chen said. "Though I should warn you, they're probably going to want to send an actual diplomatic team next time. People who know about treaties and trade agreements and all that official stuff." Dr. Okafor looked up from her tablet where she was writing notes. "I'd love to come back and do a follow-up study in a few years. This kind of rapid social evolution is extremely rare." Zorax managed something that might have been a smile. "You would be very welcome, Dr. Okafor. Though I suspect we'll still be figuring out how to implement your recommendations." The meeting concluded with handshakes and an exchange of contact information. Chen promised to send navigation data for the route back to human space, while the hegemony offered to establish communication relays to maintain contact. As the Persistence prepared to leave, Chen made her final log entry. "Mission completed, sort of. We never did finish that mining job, but the company seems pretty excited about the new trade opportunities we've opened up. Dr. Okafor collected enough research material to keep her busy for years, and Martinez made friends with half the engineering staff in the sector." She paused, looking out at the stars that no longer belonged to a galactic empire, but to a loose confederation of species trying to figure out how to govern themselves efficiently. "First contact mission completed, I guess. Found some interesting new trade routes, and learned a lot about local politics. The locals seem nice enough, though they had some serious management issues when we arrived. recommend future expeditions bring better coffee, and maybe some basic government efficiency manuals. The Persistence engaged its experimental FTL drive one last time. The familiar vibration ran through the ship as they prepared to jump back to their own dimension. This time, the lights flickered in a pattern that reminded Chen of a cheerful wave goodbye. As they disappeared through the dimensional rift, they left behind a galaxy that was learning something remarkable. The most powerful force in the universe was not fear or strength or ancient authority. It was the simple willingness to treat everyone like reasonable people and expect them to act accordingly. 3 months later, the hegemony officially changed its name to the Galactic Cooperative Council. Their new motto was, "Efficient Service for All Species." Admiral Zorax became their first elected president, winning on a platform of practical problem-solving and customer satisfaction. Dr. Okafor's research paper became required reading in diplomatic academies throughout the galaxy. Her classification of the old hegemony as fairly standard was now used as an example of how not to organize an interstellar government. Martinez's poker game became a permanent institution on Station Gamma 7, renamed Friendship Station. It was considered the most successful diplomatic program in the sector, bringing together species that had been enemies for generations to argue about card games and share engineering tips. Back in human space, the Persistence returned to its regular mining routes. The crew filed their reports, got their pay, and went back to pulling rare minerals out of asteroids. It was honest work that paid well. And it was not particularly glamorous. Captain Chen never mentioned to her company that they had accidentally revolutionized galactic civilization. She figured it would just complicate the paperwork. The galaxy, meanwhile, continued its quiet transformation. Species throughout the former empire were discovering that when you stopped being impressed by people who demanded respect and started expecting them to earn it instead, amazing things could happen. And somewhere in human space, a coffee machine that had never worked properly was finally serving decent coffee, because sometimes the most important changes are the smallest ones.